Hi, thanks so much for joining us today for Front Porch Conversations here at the Advent Christian Village. We hope you'll enjoy our visit with our guests today, George and Lois Brisbane. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
It's nice to sit down with you and visit today. George, will you tell us where you were born and where you grew up?
I was born in 1934 in a little town called Mayo, Michigan. And my parents were being pushed around very much by the Depression, and so Dad was actually working in New York at the time I was born, but Mom didn't want any of her children born in New York City. So she went home to her home in Mayo, and a week later she put me in a basket, a little picnic basket, and got on the train and went back to New York. So my stay in Mayo was not very long. And my folks drifted around trying to keep a job until about 1940, when my father wound up in Tampa, Florida, and wound up with a job with the Atlantic Coastline Railroad. And so Tampa was where I grew up, and graduated from Hillsborough High School in '53.
Lois, what about you? Where were you born?
I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. My dad was working for Ford Motor Company during the war, and they closed the plant in Virginia, so they moved down to Georgia, and I lived there about 3 years approximately. My younger brother was born in Indiana because they closed the Ford plant where my dad worked in Atlanta. So we moved up to Indiana, where I was raised and where I graduated from high school. And then I met George while I was in high school and went on to nursing school after that.
George, what are some fond memories of your early years in Tampa growing up?
I think my best memories of meeting and dating Lois and our young life together. We've had a good life, and we pretty well, I tell everybody she's a keeper.
And after how many years is that, George?
We've just celebrated our 62nd anniversary.
That's wonderful. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
And yeah, I went into the Army from Tampa. I went into the Army, went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and after infantry training, I went into mechanic school at Porch Jackson and was in the upper part of the class, so they sent me to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where I went to tank mechanic school and was assigned to the 3rd Armored Division in Fort Knox, and they were getting ready to go to Germany. And I knew some friends from Tampa who had relatives in New Albany, which is right across the river from Louisville, closest city to Fort Knox. And so I would go into Louisville, take a bus across to New Albany and go to church, and that's where I met my pretty wife.
And what church was that?
That's the New Albany Advent Christian Church. It was a church where we were married. In fact, a pastor that was here at one time, Reverend Chambers, Reverend Chambers is the gentleman that married us, and so we have ties back here quite a bit. And
what church did you attend in Tampa?
I started attending the Francis Avenue Church, and then I went into the military and one thing and another, and came back home in the early 60s. And at that time, Francis Avenue was building their new church out in Lowry Park. And so I became involved in that effort. And we then also started attending Lowry Park when the church opened there in Lowry Park, moved out of Francis Avenue. So
Lois, you mentioned you went to nursing school. Where did you attend nursing school?
Copley Hospital in Copley. It's near Chicago. So I went up there. I had my first son before I finished, which wasn't really, required.
It was a big no-no.
Yes, that's what I've understood.
But we were able to do it and finished up okay. And I nursed at several different places while we were married. Didn't work while we were having children down in Wilmington, North Carolina, right? And but once they got up a little bit, then I went to work in Florida when we moved down there, and worked in the Canal Zone when we lived down there, and then I worked in right about in
Portsmouth.
Portsmouth, Virginia. Worked at a naval hospital there, and enjoyed that work and enjoyed my nursing career.
Were most of your nursing assignments on military bases, or did that?
No, just the last one was at the Naval Hospital in Portsmouth, and that was quite interesting, helping the new nurses get started. And it was during the war sometimes, and so it was, needed. And I enjoyed my work with the military.
What did you have a specialty in nursing?
Worked a lot of different areas. I always liked to work in the hospitals. They were very good and very active, and was a lot going on. So I did enjoy working with the people in the active duty hospital.
Lois, you mentioned children. How many children do you have?
I had 4. I lost one, and that was about 5 or 6 years ago. And but she has 2 children, and they're about to graduate from
College.
From college. You're right. They've been going to
Virginia Tech.
Virginia Tech, right? And one of them wants to be a doctor, and so we hope that she will. And of course, they have boyfriend and girlfriend, so we'll see how that goes. Turns out.
George, tell us a little bit about your career time in the military, and then what happened after the military.
Well, actually, I didn't have much of career time in the military. I only spent 3 years in. I only went into the military to get rid of my military requirement, so that once we started a family and one thing and other, which I was looking forward to, even though I hadn't met her at the time, I just didn't want to be a married man and then have to go into the military, So I didn't see how that would work very well. And so I got out after 3 years. And she and I both went to Aurora College from about 57 to 60. And I dropped out of Aurora. I was intending to be a missionary to Central or South America. Mm-hmm. And during my junior year, I took Spanish and I took Introduction to Missions, and I flunked both classes. I think God was trying to tell me something. Took about 1.5 years off from college, and then went back to NC State. And North Carolina, graduated as a civil engineer from NC State. And I've worked in an area called traffic engineering ever since then. And I was among those that got cursed the first thing in the morning by people wanting to know what idiot put that stop sign there. And the last one in the evening when you wanted to know if they couldn't do a better job timing these traffic signals. I'm stopping at every one, But it was, traffic engineering to me was always wonderful because it's a combination of engineering. There's a lot of engineering in it, but also you have to try and anticipate what the driver is going to think of what you're doing, because all you're doing is controlling cars with paint and signs. And if they don't make any sense to the driver, he's not going to pay any attention to them. So you had to bring in that part of human thinking and human engineering into the mechanical engineering field.
So looking ahead, if you were still working in the field, what differences would you make with for the autonomous cars they're building now?
Very interesting question. You take the responsibility of the operating the vehicle away from the driver, and you have a mechanical thing making decisions for you. I'll give you a hypothetical. You have two vehicles, actually three vehicles involved. If the car takes a evasive action to miss vehicle 1, it's going to hit vehicle 2. Who makes that decision? You know, you with a mechanical thing, you don't have that last minute human touch of decision making that I think is so important. And while it's great, we've come a long way with in the area of traffic accidents and traffic fatalities. When I started in the field, we were losing about 1,000 people a week with traffic accidents, and today we're more in the area of 100 a week than 1,000. But moving into the autonomous vehicle is going to reduce that even further, but it's not a panacea. I just don't think autonomous vehicles are the end of all things. I still think there's a place for humans.
That's good to know. Well, thank you for shedding light on that situation coming up with the possibility of autonomous vehicles. As you said, you feel like there's still a room for us humans to drive. Is that right? Good. How long were you? Did you work in that area?
About 45 years.
Only 45? Well, I'm sure you saw a lot of changes during that time.
Yes, I actually had an interesting career in the fact that I've spent about half of my time working for private companies, about half the time working for governments. I've worked for Panama Canal Company in Panama, Central America. Was their chief traffic engineer there, which I didn't have anything to do with ship traffic. I had land traffic, the railroads, all the vehicles and the roads and everything in the entire zone, 50 miles wide, long and 10 miles wide.
And how long did you live there?
We lived there about 4.5 years until Carter gave our job away in 1979.
Lois, what were your favorite parts about living there?
Well, I like living outside. You know, being outside, it was a nice place to raise children because, you know, it was safe and, you know, there were a lot of activities around the boats. And so the oldest boy, he was a lot like his dad. He loved boats. And they wound up going to New York in '76 in a sailboat, a bunch of teenagers and, you know, a few adults, and they made it back, and they were there for the surroundings and the excitement, I guess you'd say, of the parade of sail in New York City. And so that was quite a accomplishment, I think, that they had.
But you didn't attend?
No, I had 3 other children besides John, and although the second son, he went on the way back, he was only about, what, 10, and he hopped aboard for the trip back.
He came on board in Fernandina Beach and went from there back to Panama, sailed that last 500, well, it's about almost 1,000 miles of sailing.
Well, George, I understand you had a particularly exciting role during that event. Would you tell us about that?
I wouldn't call it an event, I would call it a period of time.
Okay.
Because it started, we had no more than moved into the canal zone in 74. And John went on a Boy Scout trip to Ecuador and back. And when I went over to pick him up, it was a Saturday morning, it was sort of foggy and one thing and another. And he pointed to a sailboat laying at a dock near where his Navy ship docked. And he said, "She belongs to the Boy Scouts and she's looking for a captain." And talked me into becoming captain of the boat, and was in very poor repair. So we spent the next year and a half repairing it and trying to get it ready to go. We used the bicentennial to raise the money to repair the boat. And actually the sailing trip to New York and back, the bicentennial tall ship parade, was actually an adjunct to the real purpose, and that was to get the boat in sailing shape so that the kids could enjoy it. And so we spent a year and a half repairing it, and we sailed over 5,000 miles, 99 days, 23.5 hours. We lacked a half hour being exactly 100 days from the time we sailed out of Cologne until the time we sailed back into Cologne.
And how many there were Boy Scouts on board with you?
Yes, it was the Explorer level, which is the next grade above the Boy Scouts. It's the senior division. It was co-ed. We had as many girls on board as we did guys. We did not pay much attention to whether they were girls or boys. We paid attention to who could do what job the best. And we ran the boat that way. And basically, the intent was to allow the kids to run the entire boat, and adults, there were 4 adults on board, 12 kids, and the intent was for the 12 kids to be the everything, and we were only there for supervising. And you know, when you sail into a port, you got to clear customs, and customs requires an adult with a signature to get in and one thing and another. But we were only there as overseers and advisors. We were not there as crew.
I can't imagine what it would have been like to be in the harbor with all those other sailing ships for that event.
The 3rd of July and the 4th of July. The 3rd of July we came down out of Long Island Sound through the East River and into the Brooklyn area, and I went to anchor there in preparation for the parade the next morning. That particular passage was, I don't know how to explain it. There were so many boats. I couldn't even pick out my escort boat out of the mess. There were so many boats that it just was impossible. I finally got to the point where I'm bigger than most all of you. If you're bigger than me, I'll pay attention to you, but if you aren't, just get out of my way. Mm-hmm. And there are probably 2,000 to 3,000 boats inside of a 5-mile square area around the boats as we were coming into the East River. And it was kind of interesting. We were the sailboats were to meet pick up their escort boat at a place known as Execution Rock, which is right outside in the Long Island Sound, right outside of the East River. We were to transit the East River through a section that's called Hell's Gate, and we were to anchor right off of Brooklyn in a place called Gravesend. Now wait a minute. Go to Execution Rock, through Hell's Gate to Gravesend. I thought there for a minute when I first saw the orders, I thought it was a joke. I really did. I had no idea that those three places were real places and real names. And so.
And I'm sure over time they earned those names for various.
Yeah, the execution rock goes all the way back to the American Revolution and was used as an execution area. Hell's Gate is just a restriction in the East River that water going through there flows at over 6 knots during the race period of the tide. And if your boat can't make 6 knots, you're not getting through there if you're going the wrong way. Now, if you're going the way with the tide, it's boom, and you're gone.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. I don't know how Gravesend got its nickname off of Brooklyn, but it did.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I only have recollections of watching that on TV, and it was exciting.
I think the most exciting part of that trip for me was we had sailed out of Panama up through Jamaica and through the Bahamas. And when we cleared the Bahamas, we took and laid a line for Bermuda. And this is where we were supposed to meet all the other sailboats. And we've got to Bermuda, got there late in the evening. They had us anchor, and we were going to be brought into the harbor the next day by a pilot. And that next morning, I was up at about 4 a.m. in the morning. It was still dark. And as it began to get daylight, I began to realize that just about a mile off to the east from me was a big sailboat. And I went and got a cup of coffee and came back, and I kept watching. And as the morning sun began to come up, the sailboat was silhouetted, and she was huge, 4-masted, big square sailor laying out there. She happened to be the Russian boat, the Krusenstern, which was the largest of the boats in the Operation Sail. And it was at that point that I realized that the last year and a half of repair and work and the miles of sailing to get to where we were, that we had finally made it, and we were officially a part of the bicentennial celebration from that point forward. And it just was, it's a feeling that you can't explain. We wrote a book about it.
Well, good. I'd like to know more about that.
The book should be published sometime around the middle of this year.
Wonderful. When you, how did you know about the village?
My first trip to the village was in 1952 to Camp Swanee. My mother and father lived here during the 80s, and my dad died here, and my mother lived here until 97. Then she moved to Portsmouth, Virginia, where we were living. And but being part of the Advent Christian church and denomination, and knowing and being a Floridian, if you don't know about the village, I don't know.
You weren't paying attention.
You weren't paying attention. Penny Crusade, Fifth Sunday, the works.
Did you ever, earlier in your life, envision yourselves living here?
Not right at first. My mother and father were here. I was very satisfied with their living arrangements and everything. It was the village staff worked with my mother and through my dad's final months, and very, very pleased with what went on there. And I would say about 10 years ago, my oldest son asked me what I was planning on doing, and we were going over options, and I said, well, we could always go back to the AC Village, you know. And slowly over the last 10 years, we have taken those steps, and we finally moved here in December of 19, just before COVID struck.
And Lois, you live in Park of the Pines, is that right?
Yes,
What has surprised you after you moved to the village, other than being in a pandemic?
I want to compliment the village on its leadership and its care for its residents, especially during the pandemic. Her sister was through some senior places, and 30, 40, 50 people down with COVID in a facility and one thing and another. The entire staff here has worked tirelessly to keep COVID away, and so far my biggest impression is hats off to every one of them for the great job they did at keeping us clear of COVID. Even here in Suwannee County, other facilities similar to what we run here were not as fortunate as we were, and it was basically management and decision to put down some hard rules that we wanted to kick and scream about. But I think it's kind of like growing up. As a kid, you may not want to do that, but when you get older, you realize, hey, that was the best thing for us.
Well, I certainly agree that the village has done a wonderful job, and I'm proud to be here. And I'm so glad to have gotten to talk and visit with y'all today, and I look forward to others. And let us know when your book comes out. Thank you so much for tuning in to Front Porch Conversations. Hope you'll join us again.